Mafia boss fell in love with an obese woman as a bet and is surprised when the afternoon sun cut through the panoramic windows of Ashley Cole's penthouse office, painting sharp lines across the marble floor. He tapped his fingers against the armrest of his chair, his dark brown hair perfectly styled, watching as his rival's satisfied grin widened with each passing second. Marcus Vance sat across from him, legs crossed with calculated ease, his entire posture screaming triumph. "Come on, Cole," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. "Surely you can appreciate the genius of this little proposition." Ashley's expression remained cold, unreadable. Years in the underworld had taught him that a flicker of emotion could cost you everything. "Get to the point, Vance." 1 month. Marcus held up a single finger. 1 simple month married to someone. He paused, savoring the moment. Someone completely unsuitable for a man of your reputation. Ashley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Define unsuitable. "Oh, you know exactly what I mean." Marcus leaned back, examining his cufflinks. "Someone plain. Unremarkable. The type of woman who would make your business partners wonder if the great Ashley Cole has lost his edge. Someone who would have them questioning whether you're still fit to run this city." The waterfront development plans materialized in Ashley's mind, acres of prime property, perfect for laundering operations disguised as legitimate construction. Currently in Marcus's portfolio, they represented the final puzzle piece his empire needed. He reached for his glass of bourbon, letting the liquid coat his throat as he considered. "And when I win," Ashley said, his tone razor-sharp, "the waterfront becomes mine. Every square inch." Marcus's confidence didn't falter. "But when you fail, when you can't stomach even a month with someone who doesn't meet your standards, I get your luxury hotel chain expansion. All 12 properties." Ashley set the glass down, the crystal making a soft clink against the wood. The hotels were worth hundreds of millions, but the waterfront was irreplaceable. More critically, claiming it would cripple Marcus's entire operation in this city. "You seem convinced I'll fail." "Please." Marcus's laugh was sharp, deliberately insulting. "Everyone knows your type, Cole. You surround yourself with perfection. Beautiful women who look good on your arm, who fit the image. The idea of you being seen publicly with someone, ordinary." He shook his head. "You won't last a week." Ashley's dark eyes locked onto Marcus, his mind already calculating angles, scanning for the trap within the trap. This wasn't just about property or money. This was about power, reputation, and whether Ashley Cole could be manipulated by his own pride. 1 month, Ashley repeated slowly. "A legal marriage. Public appearances. Very public." Marcus grinned. "And she has to live in your home. No separate residences, no pretending she doesn't exist. You have to sell it as real." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and the weight of 2 empires colliding. Ashley studied his rival, noting the overconfidence, the assumption that he had already won. That was Marcus Vance's first mistake. "You have yourself a deal, Vance." Ashley stood, extending his hand across the desk. 1 month. 1 marriage. And then the waterfront is mine. As Marcus clasped his hand, sealing the wager, Ashley's mind was already moving 3 steps ahead. He needed someone who fit Marcus's criteria perfectly, someone who would make his associates whisper, who would seem unremarkable enough to satisfy the bet's terms. What Ashley didn't know yet was that his search would lead him to Betty Ryan, and that the woman he chose as a pawn would turn out to be the only person capable of challenging the empire he'd built from blood and steel. The game had begun. But neither player had any idea who would truly win. 3 days later, Ashley sat in the back of his black sedan, scrolling through photographs his team had compiled. Each woman carefully vetted, each profile analyzed for maximum humiliation value. Marcus wanted ordinary. Ashley would give him invisible. The car rolled through the quieter part of the city, past strip malls and modest storefronts that Ashley rarely noticed. His driver slowed near a small bookkeeping office wedged between a dry cleaner and a pharmacy. Through the window, Ashley could see a woman working at a desk, her focus absolute as she moved between ledgers and a computer screen. "That's her," his assistant said from the front seat. "Betty Ryan. Age 28. Works as an independent accountant. Lives alone. No social media presence. No criminal record. No family connections we could find." Ashley studied her through the tinted glass. She was light-skinned, full-figured in a way that would make his associates' wives clutch their pearls. Her clothing was practical, unremarkable, a simple blouse and cardigan that screamed invisibility. Perfect. Background? Clean. Too clean, actually. Her history only goes back 7 years. Before that, nothing. Like she didn't exist. Something flickered in Ashley's mind, a hunter's instinct that had kept him alive in this business. People didn't just appear from nowhere. But he pushed the thought aside. He needed someone who fit the criteria, and Betty Ryan was textbook ordinary. He watched her for another moment. She had just finished with a client, an elderly man who shook her hand warmly before leaving. The gesture was brief, professional, but Ashley noticed how her posture relaxed slightly once she was alone again. Like she'd been performing. Financials. Modest income. Pays her bills on time. No debt. No luxuries. She's careful. Careful. The word hung in the air. Ashley had built an empire on reading people, on seeing what they tried to hide. This woman, sitting in her small office with her neat desk and careful bookkeeping, was trying very hard to be forgettable. Which made her either genuinely unremarkable, or remarkably good at hiding. "Run a deeper check," Ashley said quietly. "I want to know why her past is blank." "You still want to approach her?" Ashley's eyes narrowed as he watched Betty return to her ledgers, her movements efficient and controlled. She would satisfy the bet's terms perfectly. Marcus would see exactly what he expected, a woman who didn't belong in Ashley's world. "Set up a meeting," he said. "Tomorrow. I'll make my offer." As the sedan pulled away, Ashley caught one last glimpse of Betty through the window. For just a fraction of a second, she looked up, her gaze sweeping the street with an awareness that seemed too sharp for someone trying to be invisible. Then she returned to her work, and the moment passed. Ashley leaned back in his seat, already composing his pitch. He would offer her money, security, a simple transaction. 1 month of playing a role, and they'd both get what they wanted. What he didn't know was that Betty Ryan had spent 7 years waiting for someone exactly like him to walk through her door. The courthouse smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Ashley stood in the sterile hallway outside the clerk's office, adjusting his cufflinks with mechanical precision. His suit was immaculate, charcoal gray, tailored to perfection, but he'd deliberately chosen something understated. This wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction. Betty arrived exactly on time, which didn't surprise him. Punctuality seemed woven into her DNA. She wore a simple navy dress, practical heels, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. No flowers, no sentiment, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice steady. "Ms. Ryan." He gestured toward the office door. "Shall we?" The meeting 2 days ago had been brief. Ashley had laid out his offer with clinical efficiency: 1 month, full room and board, $100,000 upon completion. She would live in his home, appear at necessary public functions, and maintain the illusion of a legitimate marriage. In return, she would ask no questions about his business. Betty had listened without interruption, her face unreadable. Then she'd named her price, $200,000, and a guarantee of protection during and after the arrangement. Protection. The word had caught Ashley's attention. Protection from what? But he'd agreed. The amount was negligible compared to what the waterfront was worth. Now, standing in the courthouse with a bored clerk shuffling papers, Ashley watched Betty sign the marriage license with the same careful precision she probably used on ledgers. Her hand was steady. No hesitation, no second thoughts. "Do you have the rings?" the officiant asked, a tired-looking woman who'd clearly performed this ceremony hundreds of times. Ashley produced 2 simple gold bands from his pocket. He'd bought them that morning from a jewelry store, choosing the most unremarkable designs available. Betty accepted hers without comment, sliding it onto her finger with practiced ease. The ceremony lasted 4 minutes. The officiant recited the words with bureaucratic efficiency, and Ashley found himself studying Betty's profile as she repeated her vows. Her expression never changed. No emotion flickered across her face. She could have been signing a business contract or ordering coffee. When the officiant pronounced them married, Betty turned to face him. Her eyes met his for the first time since they'd entered the room, and Ashley felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, or a challenge he couldn't quite name. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said, already reaching for the next file on her desk. Ashley leaned in, pressing a brief, perfunctory kiss to Betty's cheek. Professional. Distant. She didn't flinch, didn't react at all. "Congratulations," the clerk said flatly, handing them the certificate. Outside, Ashley's car waited at the curb. He opened the door for Betty, and she slid into the back seat without a word. As the sedan pulled into traffic, Ashley glanced at his new wife. She was looking out the window, her expression calm, almost serene. "The month starts now," he said. Betty's reflection in the glass turned toward him, and for just a moment, Ashley thought he saw something dangerous flicker behind her eyes. "Yes," she said quietly. "It does." The mansion sprawled across 3 acres of manicured grounds, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the city lights below. Ashley's driver carried Betty's single suitcase, everything she owned, apparently, while she stood in the marble foyer, taking in her surroundings with that same calm assessment she'd shown at the courthouse. "Your room is on the 2nd floor, East Wing," Ashley said, leading her up the curved staircase. "You'll have your own space. I don't expect us to share living quarters beyond what's necessary for appearances." "Understood." He showed her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. Cream walls, expensive furniture, a bathroom with heated floors. Betty set her purse on the dresser and turned to face him, her expression unchanged. "Dinner is at 8 if you're interested," Ashley said. "Otherwise, the kitchen is stocked. Help yourself." "Thank you." The politeness grated on him somehow. He was used to fear, desire, calculation, emotions he could read and exploit. Betty Ryan gave him nothing. He left her to settle in, retreating to his office to handle business that had accumulated during the day. But concentration proved difficult. He found himself listening for sounds of movement upstairs, wondering what she was doing, how she was processing her new surroundings. At midnight, Ashley descended to the ground floor for a drink. The house was dark, silent except for the hum of climate control. He poured 2 fingers of bourbon in the study, settling into his leather chair to review contracts that needed his attention. The soft sound of footsteps made him look up. Betty stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. She'd changed into simple pajamas and a robe, her hair loose around her shoulders. For the first time, she looked almost vulnerable. "Couldn't sleep," she said, not quite a question. "I rarely do." Ashley gestured to the bar. "Help yourself if you'd like." She moved into the room with surprising confidence for someone in an unfamiliar space. He watched as she poured herself water from the carafe, her movements efficient. When she turned, she caught him studying her. "You're wondering if you made a mistake," Betty said, her voice quiet but direct. Ashley's expression didn't change, but internally he recalibrated. Not many people spoke to him so plainly. "Should I be?" "That depends on what you're really afraid of, Mr. Cole." She took a sip of water, her eyes never leaving his. "Losing the bet? Or winning it and discovering that a month with me is more complicated than you anticipated?" The air between them shifted, charged with something Ashley couldn't quite name. He stood slowly, moving around the desk with the controlled grace that had earned him his reputation. Predatory, his enemies called him. A wolf in expensive clothing. But Betty didn't step back. Didn't flinch. She simply watched him approach with that same steady gaze, as if she'd seen far worse than anything he could offer. "Good night, Mr. Cole," she said, setting down her glass. As she walked past him toward the door, Ashley caught the faintest hint of something in her expression, not fear, but recognition. As if she knew exactly what kind of man he was. And wasn't impressed. 5 days into their arrangement, Ashley returned home at 3 in the morning with blood seeping through his shirt. The meeting had gone sideways. A supplier with more ambition than sense had brought backup that wasn't on the guest list. Ashley had handled it, but not before taking a blade to his ribs. He'd dismissed his men at the gate, not wanting witnesses to his weakness. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it needed attention. He moved through the dark house toward his office, where he kept a first aid kit for occasions like this. The light in the study was already on. Betty sat in his chair, a book open on the desk in front of her. She looked up as he entered, and her eyes immediately dropped to the blood staining his shirt. Her expression didn't change, but something sharpened in her gaze. "You're hurt," she said, standing. "It's nothing. Go back to bed." "Sit down, Mr. Cole." There was steel in her voice that hadn't been there before. Ashley found himself obeying, lowering into the leather sofa as Betty crossed to the bar where he kept his medical supplies. She moved with purpose, gathering what she needed with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. "Shirt off," she said, kneeling beside him. Ashley hesitated, then unbuttoned his shirt with his good hand. The cut ran along his ribcage, about 4 inches long. Not deep enough to be fatal, but messy. Betty's hands were steady as she examined the wound, her touch clinical and sure. She cleaned it with antiseptic without warning, and Ashley hissed through his teeth at the burn. "You'll need stitches," she said calmly, already threading a needle from the kit. "This will hurt." I'm aware. She worked in silence, and Ashley watched her face as she sutured his skin with practiced precision. Her movements were confident, professional. This wasn't a woman who'd learned basic first aid from a YouTube video. This was someone who'd closed wounds before, probably more than once. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked quietly. "Does it matter?" The needle pierced his skin again, and Ashley studied her expression. Focused, calm, completely unbothered by the blood on her hands. Most people, civilians, would have been shaking, squeamish. Betty Ryan looked like she was balancing a ledger. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She tied off the final stitch with expert precision, then began bandaging the wound. "You're lucky. Another inch to the left and you'd have punctured something important." "How do you know where things are located?" Betty met his eyes, and for the first time, Ashley saw something real break through her careful facade. Knowledge. Experience. Secrets that ran deeper than he'd imagined. "I know a lot of things, Mr. Cole." She stood, gathering the bloody gauze and use supplies. "Like the fact that you had a meeting tonight with the Volkov brothers, and that they've been skimming from your shipments for 6 months. Ashley's blood went cold, and it had nothing to do with his injury. "How do you know that?" Betty paused at the door, glancing back at him with that steady, dangerous gaze. "Because I've been reading your books," she said quietly. "And someone in your organization has been very sloppy with their numbers." The charity gala was Marcus Vance's idea, of course. A very public venue where Ashley would be forced to parade his unsuitable wife in front of the city's elite. Ashley had agreed without hesitation. It was part of the performance, after all. Betty wore a simple black dress that she'd purchased for the occasion, her hair styled but not elaborate. She moved through the crowd at his side with quiet composure, deflecting the poorly disguised stares and whispered comments without visible reaction. If the scrutiny bothered her, she didn't show it. "Cole." An older man approached them near the bar, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Vincent Marcelli had been in the business for 40 years, one of the few old guards still standing. "Good to see you, Marcelli." Ashley shook his hand, noting how the man's eyes had already moved to Betty. "This is my wife, Betty." Vincent's expression froze. The smile remained fixed on his face, but something changed behind his eyes: shock, recognition, maybe fear. He stared at Betty for a long moment, and Ashley watched his wife's posture shift almost imperceptibly, becoming more guarded. "Betty Ryan," Vincent said slowly, as if testing the name. Then his eyes narrowed. "Or should I say Betty Castellano?" The air between them crystallized. Ashley felt his pulse spike, his mind racing through implications. Castellano. The name meant something, echoed through the underworld's history like a ghost story. Betty's expression remained neutral, but Ashley saw her hand tighten slightly on her clutch. "You're mistaken, Mr. Marcelli. My name is Ryan." "Is it now?" Vincent's voice dropped lower, meant only for the three of them. "Because you look exactly like your father. Same eyes, same way of standing, like you're measuring everyone in the room for a coffin." "Vincent." Ashley's voice carried a warning, but his mind was churning. "Castellano." Victor Castellano had ruled the eastern seaboard 15 years ago, a legend in their world. Brilliant, ruthless, untouchable. Until he'd vanished overnight, his entire operation dismantled, his name becoming synonymous with downfall. Victor's daughter, Vincent continued, wonder and wariness mixing in his tone. I heard you disappeared when he fell. Thought you were dead, honestly. Most people did. Betty lifted her chin slightly, and for the first time since Ashley had met her, she looked dangerous. Not threatening, dangerous. Like a weapon that had been carefully concealed and was now beginning to show its edge. Victor Castellano had no children, she said quietly, her voice carrying absolute finality. He made sure of that before he disappeared. Did he? Vincent studied her face, then glanced at Ashley with something that might have been pity. Well then, I must be mistaken. My apologies, Mrs. Cole. He walked away, leaving Ashley and Betty standing in the middle of the gala, surrounded by oblivious guests and champagne glasses. Ashley turned to his wife, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not a simple accountant. Not an ordinary woman hiding from the world. The daughter of a king, pretending to be a pawn. We need to talk, he said quietly. Betty's eyes met his, and he saw confirmation in their depths. Yes, she agreed. We do. They didn't speak on the drive home. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions and carefully guarded secrets. When they arrived at the mansion, Betty went straight to the library, a room Ashley rarely used, filled with leather-bound books that came with the property. He found her there an hour later, surrounded by ledgers he kept locked in his office safe. His financial records, shipping manifests, personnel files, all spread across the mahogany table like a war map. How did you get into my safe? His voice was controlled, but anger simmered beneath the surface. Betty looked up from a spreadsheet, her reading glasses perched on her nose. Your combination is your mother's birthday. Sentimental for a man who claims to have no weaknesses. Ashley moved into the room, his eyes scanning the documents she'd laid out. You had no right. You're being robbed, Betty interrupted, tapping a column of numbers. Systematically. For at least 8 months, possibly longer. She pulled another ledger toward her. Your warehouse manager, Thomas Chen, has been signing off on shipments that never arrived. The inventory numbers don't match the manifest records. Ashley's jaw tightened. Chen had been with him for 5 years, vetted thoroughly, trusted. And here. Betty slid another document across the table. Your accountant, the one who handles the casino revenues, has been skimming 2% off every deposit. Small enough to miss, large enough to add up to nearly $500,000 over the past year. She stood, moving to a corkboard she'd apparently set up on the wall. Photographs, names, connection lines drawn in red marker. His entire organization mapped out with frightening accuracy. Your problem isn't that you have thieves, Mr. Cole, Betty said quietly, studying her handiwork. Your problem is that you have a network of thieves, all coordinated. Someone is running a parallel operation inside your empire, and they've been doing it long enough to get comfortable. Ashley stared at the board, his mind racing through the implications. If she was right, and the evidence suggested she was, then someone close to him had orchestrated a systematic betrayal. Who? Betty turned to face him, and in the lamplight, he could see the shadow of who she used to be. Not Betty Ryan, mild-mannered accountant. But a Castellano, raised in the underworld's royal family, educated in the art of empire. I have 3 suspects, she said, pulling down a file folder. But I need access to your communication records to narrow it down. Your emails, phone logs, meeting schedules for the past year. Why are you doing this? Ashley asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. You could have stayed invisible, collected your money, disappeared when the month ended. Betty was quiet for a moment, her fingers resting on the edge of the table. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of old ghosts. Because my father taught me that the only thing worse than losing power is watching someone steal it from you slowly, piece by piece, while you're too arrogant to notice. Her eyes met his. And because if someone is bold enough to rob you blind, they're planning something bigger. Something that will end with both of us dead. The words hung in the air between them, a truth neither could ignore. Ashley had married her thinking she was a pawn. He'd brought a queen into his fortress. Ashley spent the next 2 days giving Betty access to everything she requested. Communication logs, security footage, personnel records that dated back years. He watched her work with the focused intensity of a surgeon, dissecting his empire piece by piece until the infection revealed itself. On the third morning, he found her in the library, staring at her corkboard with an expression that sent ice through his veins. She'd circled one name in red, drawn lines connecting it to a dozen others. David Santos, Ashley said, reading the name. His second in command. The man he'd trusted with his life for 8 years. He's been planning this for at least 2 years, Betty said, her voice hollow. Maybe longer. He's the one who recruited Chen, who turned your accountant. He's been building a shadow network inside your organization, positioning himself to take over. Ashley's hands clenched into fists. That's impossible. David has been loyal. David has been patient. Betty pulled down a stack of printed emails. These are communications between him and Marcus Vance, going back 18 months. They've been coordinating this entire time. The words hit Ashley like a physical blow. Marcus. The bet. It had never been about humiliation or property. It had been about distraction, about keeping Ashley focused on a manufactured crisis while David dismantled his empire from within. The bet was part of it, Betty continued, following his thoughts. Marcus needed you preoccupied, off balance. A month focused on maintaining a fake marriage instead of watching your own house. She turned to face him. But they didn't count on you choosing me. Ashley stared at the evidence, his mind racing through every interaction, every decision he'd made in the past year. David had been there for all of it, offering advice, supporting his choices, all while bleeding him dry. When? His voice was cold, controlled. The rage would come later. Right now, he needed clarity. Soon. Within the week. Betty pointed to a series of highlighted dates. He's been consolidating power, moving assets into position. Once he has enough leverage, he'll make his move. Probably frame you for something that will bring federal attention, then swoop in to save the organization. And Marcus gets the waterfront as payment for his help. Along with a partnership in your entire operation. Betty's eyes were hard. They're not just trying to take what you have, Ashley. They're trying to erase you completely. The use of his first name cut through the formality that had existed between them. Ashley looked at Betty, really looked at her, and saw not just a Castellano but a partner who'd spent days protecting him from a threat he hadn't even seen. Why didn't you just leave? He asked quietly. You could have walked away, let them tear me apart. Betty was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the corkboard. When she spoke, her voice carried something he hadn't heard before, vulnerability. Because I've watched an empire fall once before, she said. I watched my father's world collapse because he trusted the wrong people, because he couldn't see the knives until they were already in his back. Her eyes met his. I won't watch it happen again. Not when I can stop it. Ashley crossed the room, standing close enough to see the exhaustion in her face, the weight she'd been carrying since she'd recognized the pattern in his books. "What do we do?" Betty's expression hardened, and for the first time, Ashley saw the daughter of Victor Castellano emerge fully. Not hiding, not pretending, but ready to fight. "We set a trap," she said. "And we remind them why the name Castellano used to make grown men afraid." The meeting was scheduled for midnight in one of Ashley's warehouses on the waterfront. David had suggested it, neutral ground, he'd said, for discussing a sensitive shipment issue. Ashley had agreed without hesitation, playing the role of the trusting boss one final time. Betty sat in the car beside him as they drove through the darkened streets, her face composed but her eyes alert. She wore dark clothing, practical boots. Not the accountant anymore. Something closer to what she must have been before she disappeared. "He'll have at least 6 men inside," she said, reviewing the warehouse schematics on her tablet. "Probably positioned here, here, and here." She marked the locations. "Chen will be there too. Maybe your accountant. And Marcus. He'll want to watch from a distance. He's a coward at heart." Betty zoomed in on a section of the map. "There's a control room on the 2nd floor. That's where he'll be." Ashley's phone buzzed with a message from David, "We're ready when you are." "He thinks we're walking into an execution," Ashley said quietly. "We are." Betty looked up from the tablet, her expression fierce. "Just not ours." They'd spent the past 2 days making their own preparations. Ashley had quietly reached out to the few men he knew were clean, soldiers who'd been with him from the beginning, whose loyalty ran deeper than money or fear. They were already in position around the warehouse, waiting for his signal. When they entered through the main door, David was there with his artificial smile and his traitor's eyes. Chen stood beside him, along with 5 other men Ashley recognized from his payroll. All armed. All positioned to ensure he wouldn't leave alive. "Ashley." David's tone was friendly, concerned. "Thanks for coming. I know it's late, but this couldn't wait." "What's the problem?" Ashley kept his voice neutral, his hands visible. Beside him, Betty stood with her head slightly bowed, playing the meek wife. "The problem," David said, and his smile disappeared, "is that you've become a liability." The men raised their weapons in unison, the clicks of safeties releasing echoing through the warehouse. Ashley felt Betty tense beside him, but neither of them moved. "David." Ashley's voice was cold as winter. "You really should have checked the 2nd floor." David's expression flickered with confusion. Then the lights went out. Ashley and Betty dropped to the ground as gunfire erupted from the catwalks above. Ashley's loyal men had been waiting in the shadows, and now they rained precision fire down on David's ambush. Chen went down first, screaming. 2 of the others fell before they could find cover. Betty moved like liquid shadow, rolling behind a stack of crates and emerging with a weapon she'd somehow concealed. She fired twice, and one of David's men dropped with bullets in his chest. "You taught her to shoot?" David's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, panicked now. "What the hell, Ashley?" "I didn't have to," Ashley called back, tracking David's position by sound. "Her father did." The silence that followed was profound. Then David laughed, a broken sound. "Castellano. Of course. You married Victor Castellano's daughter. That's rich." "It's over, David." Ashley circled through the shadows, closing in. "Your men are dead or running. Marcus is in custody, we picked him up 20 minutes ago. It's just you now. A gunshot rang out, wild and desperate. It missed Ashley by feet. Betty's voice cut through the darkness, cold and commanding. David Santos. My father used to talk about men like you. Small men who mistake patience for strength, who think betrayal is the same as intelligence. Another shot, closer to where Betty's voice had come from. But she'd already moved. The difference, Betty continued from a new position, is that strong men know when they're beaten. The lights came back on, sudden and blinding. David stood in the center of the warehouse, his gun raised but his hand shaking. He was surrounded, Ashley's men on the catwalks, Ashley himself blocking the main exit, and Betty emerging from the shadows with her weapon trained on his chest. Drop it, Ashley said. David's gun clattered to the concrete floor. The month ended on a Tuesday morning, exactly 30 days after their courthouse wedding. Ashley stood in his office with the deed to the waterfront properties in his hand, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold. Marcus Vance had signed over everything before disappearing into witness protection, terrified of what remained of his former allies. David Santos was dead. He'd tried to run during the transfer to a secure location and been shot by guards who'd been paid to miss their mark. No one mourned him. Betty entered the office quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose. In the morning light, she looked younger, less burdened. The paperwork is done, she said, handing him a cup. The waterfront is officially yours. Every acre, every contract, every dollar. Ours, Ashley corrected. This wouldn't have happened without you. Betty smiled slightly, a rare expression that transformed her face. No, it wouldn't have. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city wake up. The past month had been a lifetime compressed into weeks. Violence and revelation, betrayal and unexpected partnership. Ashley had entered the bet believing he was playing a game. He'd learned instead that he'd been the one being played, until Betty had rewritten all the rules. So, Betty said finally. The month is over. Do you want to drive me back to my office, or should I call a car? Ashley set down his coffee cup and turned to face her. There's a third option. Is there? We could file for an annulment and go our separate ways. You take your payment, disappear back into whatever life you were building. He paused, holding her gaze. Or we could make this permanent. Betty's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Why would you want that? Because in the past month, you've proven yourself more valuable than anyone else in my organization. Because you see things I miss, because you're brilliant and ruthless and unafraid. Ashley took a step closer. And because I've spent 30 days with someone who challenges me, who doesn't fear me, who treats me like an equal instead of a king. Those are practical reasons, Betty said quietly. Business reasons. They are. Ashley allowed himself a small smile. But there are other reasons too. Personal ones that have nothing to do with empires or betrayals or waterfront properties. Betty studied his face, searching for deception, for the angle. But Ashley had learned from her, sometimes the most dangerous move was complete honesty. I have enemies, Betty said. People who would love to know that Victor Castellano's daughter is alive and vulnerable. Then we'll handle them together. I have secrets you don't know yet. Things from my father's time that are still dangerous. Then you'll tell me when you're ready. Betty was quiet for a long moment, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Finally, she set it down and closed the distance between them. If we do this, she said, it's not a business arrangement. It's a real partnership. Equal stakes, equal voice, equal power. I wouldn't want it any other way. And if someone tries to take what's ours again? Ashley's smile turned predatory. Then we remind them what happens when you threaten a Cole and a Castellano. Betty laughed, a genuine sound that filled the office with unexpected warmth. Then she kissed him, not the perfunctory courthouse kiss but something real and electric and full of promise. When they broke apart, Ashley saw his future clearly for the first time. Not a lonely king on a throne, but a partnership forged in blood and steel. Two broken empires merged into something stronger than either could have been alone. So Mrs. Cole, he said softly. Should we get started on building our new empire? Betty's smile was sharp and beautiful and slightly dangerous. Mr. Cole, I thought you'd never ask. Outside, the city stretched before them like a chessboard waiting for players who knew all the rules and weren't afraid to break them when necessary. The bet had been won, but the real game was just beginning. And this time, they would play it together.
Hope you enjoyed this story. Stay tuned for more interesting and captivating tales. Please like, subscribe, and share.